Hello, everybody, and I hope that you're doing well. We are now entering week 6, which means that we are halfway through the spring term. So we're moving right along, and let's go ahead and get started. So for this week, I want to go ahead and discuss a few different things. First of all, I wanted to talk a little bit about the textual research proposal assignment, which has my grades and feedback up. Last week, I shared a few notes about this on Canvas, but I do want to give an opportunity, if you are not satisfied with the grade that you received, to submit a revision and just talk about some general things that I noticed and things to work on as you prepare for submitting your second of 3 proposals, your qualitative proposal. Again, one of those 3 proposals that you submit will be one that you'll adapt into your final assignment in the course. And then we'll be getting into 2 new ways of doing qualitative research, which are historical and ethnomethodological analyses. So to get started, I wanted to talk a little bit about the textual proposals, some of the things that I noticed, and some advice as you're working forward on this assignment. So if you take a look at the most recent Canvas announcement, I went through a very detailed look at what I had noticed from these initial drafts. Again, this is optional if you're interested in making a revision, but even if you're not, I think some of this feedback might be useful as you're preparing for your next proposal in the course. So just to be clear, I know that this is the type of assignment that you might not have done as much for another course, or you might be less familiar with some of the expectations here. And while I did my best to try to lay out, give you examples, and kind of show you how you might go about outlining this project, I also know that sitting down and doing it can be, a challenging process, and I wanted to share some general notes and feedback about a lot of the ones that I noticed and some tips here. So first of all, you are welcome to resubmit your proposal with edits and updates by Sunday for a revised, updated grade that would replace your original grade on the assignment that integrates my feedback and some comments given here. Again, this is optional, but you're welcome to do it if you don't feel great about the score that you received. So the big thing that I would encourage people to work on, which I noticed with several submissions, is the literature review, right? So the purpose of a literature review in some type of academic research project or research for this course, right, is to review and provide an assessment of previous research that is discussed or related to your topic in some way, right? The idea here is that whenever you're developing research, if it's communication research or anywhere else, that you've had the chance to look at previous work, right? Every assignment, every project, every piece of research is building off of previous research. So being able to speak to, draw from the key findings and ideas that are coming about from previous work is a way to inform what you're currently doing. My advice is to think about the key topics or issues that you would be exploring in your research project. So for example, if you were looking at a textual analysis of a commercial, right? You might be analyzing how media, film, and advertising have been discussed and the usage of visual advertising and visual media, and then doing a search through academic databases to find relevant scholarly articles that talk about those topics, and then assembling those sources and articles together into your review of previous literature, right? So in this way, develop a set of sources and use those sources and arrange those sources in a way that explains, okay, here's how previous research has talked about the topic. So this large paragraph is an example here of discussing counterpublics, right? Using different sources of presenting counterpublics, discussing what counterpublics are designed to do, right? And providing a variety of examples here that are reviewing and summarizing previous research. Again, for your proposal, 5 to 7 outside sources is fine, but a review of literature, right, is not providing a sort of summary of your topic. It's providing a summary of previous cited work that is, scholarly sources that are informing and guiding your project. It's not necessarily sources that talk specifically about either your artifact or method, but are close to it, right? Think about it as kind of a funnel where you're getting closer and closer to the gap or the issue in current research that you are addressing through the course of your project. Additionally, make sure that you're including both in-text and works cited. Both of those things are important to include in your formal written assignments. You can use APA, MLA, or Chicago. Make sure you're including a citation when you are directly quoting or paraphrasing an idea from an outside source. And then the structure, right? So the proposal, the introduction, right, is establishing what your artifact is, what your topic is, and how you're addressing it, as well as your research question. Your literature review, as mentioned, is going over and summarizing previous work. And your proposed design, right, is explaining how you're addressing that. So what are you going to analyze? How are you going to do this? Instead of actually doing the analysis, this is just proposing the project that you would be doing, right? The actual analysis is what you would do in a final project. So for example, for the qualitative proposal, right, you're not actually doing an interview study yet. You're not doing an ethnography yet. You are proposing how you might do an interview or ethnography. That way, when you go to do that as your final project, you've got the structure and you've got the things that you've developed there, and you're sitting down and actually doing the thing that you have proposed and set out to do. So I do hope that this helps to clarify. Again, I've tried to be as clear as possible about this and expectations for the assignment. Please let me know if you have any questions or in need of additional support as you're working through this. We're all learning, growing together, and I know that some of the specifics of developing this kind of assignment can be challenging. So I know that you have my support as you're working through and developing this. So your next assignment of the 3 proposals is your qualitative proposal, which is due on May 21st, so in a couple weeks from now. And this is picking one of the methods of qualitative analysis, such as interviews that we talked about last week, historical and ethno-methodological analyses that we'll be getting into this week, or participant observation that we'll be getting into next week. Again, this should be standard Spartan margins, an introduction that establishes the topic and research question, review of literature, and proposed research design. So you might think about, for instance, maybe there's a topic or issue you want to understand in interviewing, such as how a particular population experiences challenges in healthcare, or how a particular population is utilizing social media like TikTok, right? So depending on the qualitative method that you're doing, you're setting up your project, right? So as a reminder, for your final project, if you're actually doing research that involves human subjects, such as an interview or a survey, you need to receive institutional review board approval before doing that, which is linked on the front page of Canvas. And I'm also happy to work with you if you're interested in developing an IRB form. And then you can always send me rough drafts, outlines, or questions. If you find yourself in need of an extension on this assignment, please let me know by next Monday, May 15th at the latest, if you need additional time, and let me know to what date you might need an extension if you do. Again, I'm happy to look over and discuss the qualitative proposal with you in advance. So let's get into historical analysis, which is one of the 2 new methods that we'll be getting into for this week. So the key idea here in conducting a historical analysis is the idea that history and the study of history is not neutral, right? Power, representation, and the experiences of populations shape our understanding of what constitutes history. If we look at a variety of states, such as the state of Texas, the types of textbooks that they use in their history curriculum have generated a lot of debate, discussion, criticism, and pushback. How do we talk about history? Whose history are we discussing? Those are issues to consider. You might be familiar with the phrase, history is written by the victors, right? And considering how history is accounted for. When we analyze history, we have to consider the evidence, the interpretations, and the examples of how issues have been discussed in the past, right? History is not just objective. While there are factual events that did occur, there's a game of telephone. There is the way that there is missing and at times destroyed information. It's about interpreting and making sense of all of this information and putting it together in developing a communication project. So in terms of doing historical research, there are a few different things that you can do. One is a more biographical story, where it's examining the legacy and influence of someone. So perhaps you're interested in examining someone who was a major figure in journalism, media, and the development of film, and you're doing a sort of biographical analysis via historical research. Movement or idea studies are common. For example, the rhetoric and study of social movements, such as the civil rights movement, women's rights in the United States, and suffrage are examples here of studying historically what happened and what communication was used. Studying a region or population, as well as studying a sort of institution or fixture are also common. A case history of examining a particular selected incident, for example, the 1980s Challenger explosion might be an example of a case study. Selected or editorial involves the assembly of material. And we see this as depicted in things such as documentaries and historical accounts. One example here is recently the film Crip Camp was on Netflix. It's a documentary discussing the history and context of the disability rights movement in the United States, an example of historical research assembled together in a documentary form. So representing history through the usage of communication research is challenging. There's a lot of different reasons for this, and one of them is the idea that making sense of the past and understanding history is coming in with fragmented, often contradictory information, right? You have limited accounts and understanding as to the history and understanding of the past. And it's important for us to understand what of this history and previous material is meaningful and significant to the goals that you're trying to pursue. Lastly, there is the role of postmodernism, a school of thought that developed as a critique or incredulity toward what are considered to be broad meta-narratives or broad totalizing views of the world, how the world is structured, and so forth. In other words, our understanding of history is very fragmented, is very challenging to assemble, and there's resistance to putting it together in a neat bow. Instead, to recognize the complications and challenges that come with our ability to make sense of the past events. So what this means for a method of research in communication. The first thing you have to ask yourself if you're interested in doing historical research is to say, what is this connection of historical research to communication? One way you might explore this is to say, how is this history talked about or represented through the use of communication, such as film, media, interviews, and so forth? Looking at various communication artifacts or fragments, such as public speeches or addresses throughout history. Or pursuing a project that's examining the history of something relevant to communication, such as the development of telecommunications and so forth. So it's important to find reliable, meaningful primary and secondary sources. I encourage you to consider if you have access to archive and library databases to generate meaningful analysis and making sense of the past. For example, I've been involved in archival research that involves going to sites or spaces in which access to meaningful information, photos, data, and other material is available that wouldn't otherwise be known or accessible. So historical approach is one way of doing qualitative analysis, to understand and to make sense of history, how that history is communicated, written, and talked about. Another approach that can be used is the idea of ethnomethodology. In other words, this refers to the idea of people's common sense knowledge. That is, how do people day to day in cultures and societies make sense of the world? How do they communicate? How do they understand and engage with people? What are the day-to-day activities that people do? It's not about the researcher making their own assumptions and drawing their own conclusions, but instead breathing life into the lived experiences of others. For example, pictured here on the right are the Piraha, who are an indigenous people in the Amazon rainforest. And the Piraha are known for being anumeric, for not having words to describe numbers past 3. So they might say there's 1 stick, 2 sticks, 3 sticks, and then many sticks. So ethnomethodology is about understanding this culture, how this culture communicates, and the meaning that they derive from their usage of communication. So the goals of ethnography and ethnomethodology as an approach is to understand and define the common sense, what's happening in daily life in this population, how is this everyday experience related or relevant to a particular theory or concept that you're exploring, and showing us this lived experience of a population or group. Generally speaking, you understand what's happening in the world through research, and after you receive some type of IRB approval, you would typically attend, participate, or otherwise study an organization or group. For example, this could be some type of formal club or activity, or perhaps an organization or institution you're interested in, such as a hospital, right? To understand how it and its members communicate. So to engage in ethnomethodological research, again, if we think back and like kind of understanding the everyday or in the past, there were oftentimes things like Furbies that were very common as an artifact of the past, understand how they were used in the everyday. Consider what it is that you're aiming to uncover. In other words, what are the everyday lived experiences of populations you're hoping to better understand? For example, it might be how young people are using social media and engaging with a population who is using social media to understand their behavior. Considering the texts, including mediated text that you're analyzing and incorporating into this work. So what is it that you're studying? What's the population? And what are the communication practices that they're doing, right? Ethnomethodological research is relevant to communication insofar as people are using communication as a means of conveying shared reality. So ethnomethodological research is a way of understanding the day-to-day communication activities and practices of a population or group of people. So to wrap up the key ideas here, consider an optional revision for your textual proposal. If so, make sure to get that to me by Sunday. We talked about both historical and ethnomethodological research. Historical using archives, accounts from the past, primary and secondary sources to make sense of previous information, and ethnomethodological research making sense of experiences as they occur in the everyday. Both of these useful for our understanding of qualitative communication research. Next week, we'll get into participant observation, which will wrap up our discussion about qualitative methods. And next week will also be when you'll want to make sure to turn in your qualitative proposal. Have a great rest of your week. I will be available for any questions or concerns that you have, and I look forward to talking with you more next week. All right, have a good one.